Rhetorical rock stars, welcome back. This is going to be the second of 4 videos on argumentation, the basics of argumentation, and it's also the 4th video in this series about preparing and reviewing materials for the AP Language and Composition test. In the last video, we talked just about the basics of what an argument is and what an argument isn't. In this video, we're going to be talking more about claims. So how do we make claims that can lead to effective arguments? So digging a little bit more deeply into some of the elements of argumentation than in the previous video. As with other videos, this video will reference material that's found in our textbook for the class, The Language of Composition, Reading, Writing, and Rhetoric, with some of my own stuff added in. So let's get started with claims. So we should probably start with defining what a claim is. In the previous video, I talked about claims needing to be realistic, but we also need to just understand what I mean by claim. So again, I'm going to go through some examples of both what a claim is and what a claim isn't in order to illustrate what I mean by, when we have a claim in an argument, what we're talking about. So a claim must be arguable, not simply an assertion of fact. And it needs to be stated as a complete thought. So when we talk about arguable, remember we're talking about Rogerian arguments. We're talking about it needs to be able to be to bring in all sides of whatever the topic is and have rational discussions out of which everybody will be able to feel as though they've accomplished something. So it needs to be, we need to make sure then that we aren't developing claims that are going to shut the other side down. We also need to make sure that our claims are complete thoughts. So I'm going to give three examples that actually are going to be broken into 2 parts each. And we'll start with what isn't a claim. So if we look at this claim, the sky is blue. I guess on the very basic level, maybe, middle school level, a teacher could say, okay, sure, that is a claim. But for our purposes, it certainly isn't. And the reason it isn't is because it's a verifiable fact. It's not arguable to say that the sky is blue. We all know that the sky is blue. If somebody were to claim that the sky was pink, now obviously there might be situations where the sky is pink, but we're talking generally here. If somebody were to claim that the sky is pink, then there's no basis for that argument because it's verifiable that the sky is blue. If we wanted to turn it into a claim, then we could say that today's blue sky is the most beautiful ever, in which case that is an arguable claim. Somebody may decide that no, yesterday's, or 4 years ago there was, and there are different sides that can then be engaged in the value of today's sky versus yesterday's or whatever. And this is not a verifiable fact. Another example of not a claim is this sentence. The topic of this argument is Republicans versus Democrats. Now, a lot of you are going to look at that and say, well, obviously that's not a claim, but I still just want to point out why it's not a claim. It's not arguable because it's a simple topic. It's not even really a complete thought. It's just saying, this is what my topic is, Republicans versus Democrats. There's no side taken. It's more just turning into, it implies that some kind of explanation will be given, but what exactly are we going to argue? There's no hint there. There's no completeness to the thought of that. If we wanted to turn it into a claim, then we might say something like this. Republicans and Democrats are equally ineffective, in which case we can see, all right, well, we're covering the topic of Republicans and Democrats, sure, but we've come up with a way to actually argue something about that topic, that they're both ineffective. It's a complete thought that I've put together, It's also hopefully something that a person who thinks that Republicans and Democrats are not equally ineffective, or possibly that one is more effective than the other, or whatever, they can be drawn into the argument, and both sides can then present their evidence and go forward with it. The third example of not a claim is this. Religion can cause conflict. And while it is on its surface arguable and it is a complete thought, it's also easily verified. I mean, nobody's necessarily going to come in to this statement and say, no, actually, religion can't cause conflict. So, you know, some overzealous people may claim the opposite, but anybody looking at just the basic facts are going to be able to verify it. So we want to be able to take this, kind of simple idea, which I guess technically you could argue, but not many people are going to legitimately engage with it, and turn it into something a little bit more complex and complete to make it arguable. So we could say something like this. The modern public practice of many competing religions is detrimental to world peace. Therefore, religion should only ever be a private practice. And in this case, we've actually got a couple of things that are arguable here. You've got detrimental to world peace. We're not going to argue that there's a modern public practice, that there are many kind of competing religions, but are those detrimental to world peace? Somebody could argue that. And then the next part of that, religion should only ever be a private practice, is also something that could be argued, because religion is often not a private practice, right? It's a public practice, so it would challenge, even just the basic public perception of religion at this point. So we've got these three examples. I want to expand on them just a little bit more now, and that is by going over three different types of claims. So what we're looking at actually are, I gave you three examples of three different types of claims that you should be clear on, and so we're going to look at what each type is. I'll also give you a description of that type of claim so that you can compare it to what you're looking at. So if we look at the first example, that is what we call a claim of fact. Now, I don't want you to get too confused about this, but it is in and of itself slightly confusing, because we usually think of facts as set in stone. In this case, in the case of argumentation, fact is referring to the assertion of truth or untruth. So a claim of fact is going to assert some kind of arguable truth. In this case, the sky is the most beautiful ever. That's either true or not. I hope that makes sense. Often these claims of fact are going to call old facts, or what we call social myths, into question. Something that we once believed but now are questioning, or something that society once held to be true for a certain reason, but now we're questioning. That's a claim of fact. So it's something that some old piece of knowledge that we once thought was true that now we are questioning the truth of. A claim of fact also requires someone to be skeptical of other positions. So if I'm taking the position that today's blue sky is the most beautiful ever, then I have to be skeptical of anybody who claims that any other blue sky was the most beautiful ever. Often claims of facts will also challenge stereotypes and social beliefs. The one that I've given you doesn't necessarily do that, but if you find, for example, the claim of fact that let's say LGBTQ people should be allowed to marry, well, that's a claim of fact, at one point, which challenged social belief that was held, and maybe still is held by people, that it's not that they shouldn't be allowed to marry. So it's calling that social kind of, I'll guess, that social stereotype or social, we we can call it a myth since now it's legal. Where it's calling that into question. The second type of claim, the one that goes along with the Republicans and Democrats are equally ineffective, is what we call a claim of value. And so what the difference between a claim of value and a claim of fact is essentially that where a claim of fact is asserting truth or untruth, a claim of value is asserting goodness or badness. So you have to be able to distinguish between true, untrue, and good or bad. In this case, Republicans and Democrats are equally ineffective is basically asserting that each are, on the same level of bad. So in this in the case of a claim of value, then we're relying more on the personal judgment or the objective evaluation of a person, which I understand is semi-present sometimes in a claim of fact, but in this case, it's going to rely a little bit more on that the judgment of the individual. So if the individual believes that both Democrats and Republicans are equally ineffective, then that's their judgment call that can be called into question by other people. Again, there is overlap between fact and value, but you just have to be able to kind of see, is it truth or untruth, or is it good or bad? The last thing that a claim of value you should be clear on for a claim of value is that it's going to require an establishment of certain criteria or standards in order to evaluate certain things. So in this case, we have one thing that needs to have a criteria or a standard associated with it, and that's the word ineffective. So we have to be able to define what ineffective is, and then we can discuss what ineffective is in relationship to Republicans and Democrats. The third claim, the one that says the modern public practice of many competing religions is detrimental to world peace, therefore religion should only ever be a private practice, is the most complex one that we're going to cover, and that's a claim of policy. So you can actually oftentimes write a claim of policy that includes claims of fact and value within it. So it includes an assertion of truth, then it includes an assertion of good or bad, and then finally it's going to propose a change to the status quo, which you can see in that third claim, that religion should only ever be a private practice. Obviously, it's challenging how we view the practice of religion today. So in order to write a claim of policy, you first have to be able to define the problem, which could be a claim of fact. You then have to be able to explain why it's a problem, which could then be a claim of value, asserting goodness or badness. And then finally, that claim of policy needs to have a call for action, that thing that's going to actually require us to change something about how we think about it. And again, these are probably the most useful types of claims in terms of argumentation, but the other two do exist within argumentation as well. So I recommend practicing writing those as single sentences. Remember that it has to be a complete thought. So there's one last thing that I want to go over with you, and that's how do we develop argumentative claims. So we know that we need to have claims, whether they're fact or value, sorry, now it's going to slip my mind, policy, but how do we get there? Because it's not just a matter of saying, this is my opinion, therefore I'm going to write it down. There's actually a process that you need to go through in order to have a really argumentative claim. And that's the process of research, consideration, and then rethinking in order to have a claim that you're actually able to argue relatively. So the process of research, we start off with developing a question. We have to set aside our pre-existing notions in order to develop that question, and then we have to explore a broad range of information in terms of that question. If our question is, let's say, let's just take the Republican and Democrat one from the previous examples. If our question is, uh, which political parties are the most effective, and we lean toward one, we have to be able to set aside the fact that we lean toward one and just explore the range of information that tells us what ineffectiveness is and how that applies to the political parties. Then we have to consider the research that we've been given. So we have to take, or that we've found, we have to take that information and we have to discuss it. This is before we argue. We just have to discuss what we're finding, and we have to compare different thoughts about, what does this mean? What does ineffective mean? Do you see this connection to the Republicans? Do you see this connection to the Democrats? And just, you're not arguing at this point. You're just discussing the information so that you're considering all of the possibilities. Third, then you have to rethink your original pre-existing notions. So you have to evaluate your biases now that you have a good grounding in it, and you have to consider multiple options. Okay, now that I understand the topic, that I've researched it, that I've considered it from multiple angles, and I've discussed this information, where do my biases lie, and what other options are there possibly? Only then can you legitimately write a claim that can be argued, because you understand all the sides, you understand why you hold the position that you do, and possibly your position has changed from what you initially thought through writing a question and exploring that question on that topic. Your opinion may have changed, and therefore you can write a better claim that you're going to be better able to argue. I hope that this information has been useful to you, and I hope that you use it, because it's very important to helping us engage with the world in a more productive way, rather than just receding back into our pre-existing notions and being able to engage with other people with different information. I look forward to seeing you as we practice this.